What makes a crew of 5 exhausted men decide to stand and fight when every rational calculation says they should abandon their disabled tank and save themselves? When your Sherman has a damaged transmission that limits movement to a crawl, when your ammunition is down to a handful of rounds, when the temperature is below zero and German forces are advancing in numbers that could overwhelm your position in minutes, what keeps you in that steel coffin instead of running? Is it duty, or is it something deeper? The refusal to abandon the men depending on you. The knowledge that if you don't hold this road junction, then the entire American defensive position could collapse. I'm 95 years old, and on the night of December 22nd, 1944, I was the gunner in a Sherman tank that held a critical crossroads outside Bastogne for 6 hours against repeated German attacks, bought time for the surrounded American forces to strengthen their defenses, and proved that sometimes 5 men in a broken tank can make the difference between victory and defeat. This is the story of that night, of a decision to stay when leaving was the only sensible option, of discovering what men are capable of when they have no choice but to endure. My name is Michael Anthony Rossi, and I was a 23-year-old staff sergeant serving as gunner in an M4 Sherman tank assigned to the 10th Armored Division in December 1944. Our division had been part of the relief force that broke through to Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge, helped open a corridor to the surrounded 101st Airborne and other forces that had been holding the town against massive German attacks. By December 22nd, the corridor was open but precarious under constant German attack, and our tank battalion was positioned to defend key roads that the Germans needed to recapture if they wanted to reclose the siege. Our Sherman, which we'd nicknamed Iron Maiden for no particular reason except that it sounded tough, was a standard M4A3 with a 75mm gun, powered by a Ford GAA V8 engine, armored with steel that could stop small arms fire and shell fragments, but not much else. The Sherman had a reputation, mostly undeserved but based on enough truth to be concerning, of being undergunned and under-armored compared to German tanks like the Panther and Tiger. American tankers had a dark joke about Sherman tanks. They were called Ronsons after the cigarette lighter because they lit first time every time when hit. The joke reflected the very real fear that the Sherman's gasoline engine and ammunition storage made it prone to catastrophic fires when penetrated. But the Sherman also had advantages. It was reliable, easy to repair, produced in massive numbers, and had good crew ergonomics that allowed trained crews to operate effectively even under stress. Our crew consisted of 5 men who'd trained together, fought together, and developed the kind of tight bond that only comes from shared danger and dependence on each other for survival. Lieutenant James Peterson from Minnesota was our tank commander, a 25-year-old officer who'd been a school teacher before the war, thoughtful and careful but decisive when decisions needed to be made. Corporal Danny Martinez from Texas was our driver, the best tank driver in the battalion, able to coax the Sherman through terrain that should have been impassable. Private Willie Thompson from Alabama was our bow gunner and assistant driver, 19 years old and perpetually optimistic despite everything we'd been through. Private Eddie Kowalski from Chicago was our loader, built like a bull and capable of maintaining an incredible rate of fire by loading 75mm rounds faster than any other loader in the company. And I was the gunner, responsible for aiming and firing the main gun, the position that required the steadiest nerves and the best eye. We'd been in combat since landing in France in September, had fought through the fall campaign and were veteran tankers by December. Iron Maiden had taken hits, had been repaired multiple times, bore scars from German anti-tank fire and near misses from artillery, but she'd always gotten us through. We trusted that tank, had confidence in it despite knowing its limitations, had developed the superstitious belief that Iron Maiden was lucky, that she'd protect us as long as we took care of her. Tank crews often develop these semi-mystical relationships with their vehicles, treating them almost like living things, and we were no exception. On December 22nd, we were part of a defensive line southeast of Bastogne, positioned to cover a crossroads where 2 roads converged, a critical intersection that the Germans would need to control if they wanted to threaten the relief corridor. Our platoon had 5 Shermans spread across about half a mile of front, each tank positioned to cover approaches and support the others. The plan was simple: hold the line, prevent German breakthrough, maintain the corridor to Bastogne. Standard defensive doctrine, nothing complicated, just a matter of execution and endurance. The trouble started around 1500 hours, when Iron Maiden threw a track while repositioning to a new hull-down position. Martinez had been backing the tank up a small rise when the right track slipped off the drive sprocket and jammed, immobilizing us completely. We radioed Lieutenant Peterson, who was in another tank about 300 yards to our left, and he sent word that maintenance would come up after dark to repair the track. In the meantime, we were stuck in place, unable to move but with good fields of fire covering the crossroads. So we'd maintain our position and function as a stationary pillbox until repairs could be made. The crew dismounted to assess the damage and see if we could repair the track ourselves, but it quickly became clear we'd need professional help. The track had twisted in a way that required specialized tools to fix, tools we didn't carry in the tank. So we climbed back inside, buttoned up against the cold, and waited for darkness and the maintenance crew. The temperature was dropping rapidly, already below 0 Fahrenheit, and sitting in a stationary tank with the engine off to conserve fuel meant we were essentially in a metal icebox. We bundled up in every piece of clothing we had, shared body heat as best we could, and tried to stay alert despite the cold that seeped through the armor and numbed our extremities. Around 1700 hours, as twilight was fading into full darkness, we got a radio call from Lieutenant Peterson. German forces were attacking the entire line, a major push with armor and infantry, trying to break through before the Americans could consolidate their positions around Bastogne. Our platoon was engaged, all 4 mobile Shermans were in combat, and there'd be no maintenance crew coming to fix our track tonight. We were on our own, stuck in place with orders to hold our position and cover the crossroads as long as we could. If we had to abandon the tank, we should destroy it first to prevent capture, then withdraw on foot to American lines. But Peterson's tone made it clear what he really wanted. He wanted us to hold, wanted us to use Iron Maiden's gun to cover that crossroads, wanted us to be the anchor that the rest of the line could pivot around. We took stock of our situation. We had 32 rounds of 75mm ammunition, a mix of armor-piercing and high-explosive shells. We had about 2,000 rounds of .30 caliber ammunition for the bow machine gun and coaxial machine gun. We had half a tank of fuel, enough to run the engine for several hours if we needed heat or power for the turret traverse. We had rations and water for maybe 2 days. We were immobile, but we had good fields of fire, and our gun was fully functional. We could fight. The question was whether we should, whether 5 men in a disabled tank should stay and defend a crossroads or save themselves and abandon the position. Lieutenant Peterson on the radio made the decision for us, or at least made it easier. Iron Maiden, I know you're stuck and I know you're vulnerable, but that crossroads is critical. If the Germans take it, they can roll up our whole line from the flank. I need you to hold it as long as you can. If it gets too hot, if you think you're about to be overrun, destroy the tank and get out. But give us as much time as you can. You're the anchor, boys. We're counting on you. We looked at each other in the dim red glow of the tank's interior lights. 5 men realizing we'd just been asked to possibly die for a road junction in Belgium. Thompson wanted to object, wanted to argue that we should abandon now while we could, but he didn't. Kowalski crossed himself and muttered a prayer. Martinez just said, well, shit, which pretty much summed up how we all felt. But Lieutenant Peterson, our commander, made the call that defined everything that came after. We hold. We didn't come all this way to run when it gets tough. We hold this crossroads, we give the line time to stabilize, and we trust that someone will figure out we're in trouble and come for us. Load armor-piercing, Kowalski. Rossi, get on the gun. Martinez, can you give me any movement at all? Martinez tried the controls, ran the engine, and managed to move Iron Maiden maybe 10 feet forward before the damaged track seized up completely. That's all I've got, Lieutenant. We're basically stationary. Peterson nodded. Then we make this our Fort Alamo. We hold until we can't hold anymore. The German attack hit our position around 1800 hours. Infantry advancing under cover of darkness toward the crossroads, supported by what sounded like tanks or assault guns from the engine noises we could hear. We had no night vision capability beyond our own eyes and the occasional illumination from flares or explosions, so we were shooting at muzzle flashes and sounds, trying to suppress the German infantry before they could close with us. I was on the main gun, traversing the turret manually to conserve battery power, peering through the gun sight at shadows and movement, trying to identify targets worth a 75mm round. The first target presented itself at about 400 yards, a German half-track moving toward the crossroads, probably carrying infantry. I centered the reticle, made minute adjustments for range and the slight crosswind, and fired. The 75mm gun roared, the breech slammed back in recoil, and the half-track exploded in a satisfying fireball. "Hit," Peterson called out, confirming the kill. Kowalski was already loading the next round, moving with practiced efficiency despite the cold and the cramped space. We'd trained for this, had done it dozens of times in combat, and the routine was comforting in its familiarity. Over the next hour, we engaged multiple targets, German infantry trying to use the crossroads, vehicles attempting to bypass our position, concentration points where the Germans were massing for attacks. We fired high-explosive rounds into infantry formations, armor-piercing rounds at vehicles, used the machine guns to suppress German riflemen. The volume of fire we put out gave the Germans the impression we were more than just one disabled tank, made them cautious, slowed their advance. But we were also burning through our limited ammunition at an alarming rate. By 1900 hours, we were down to maybe 15 rounds of 75mm, and the Germans were getting bolder as they realized we were stationary and probably alone. Around 1930, the German attack intensified. We could hear tanks, probably Panthers or Panzer IVs, moving into position, their engines distinctively different from the Shermans. Peterson called out ranges and directions. I traversed the turret and elevated the gun, and we waited for targets. The first German tank appeared at about 300 yards, moving slowly through the darkness, its commander probably unsure of our exact position. I had maybe 3 seconds to make the shot before it could identify and target us. I aimed for the thinner side armor, held my breath, squeezed the trigger. The armor-piercing round hit the Panzer IV in the side, penetrated, and the tank stopped moving, started burning. One enemy tank down, but how many more were out there? The answer came quickly. German tanks started engaging our position with their main guns, 75mm rounds from Panzer IVs and 75mm rounds from Panthers hitting the ground around Iron Maiden, sending up geysers of frozen dirt and snow, probing for our exact location. One round hit our upper glacis plate, the sloped frontal armor, and bounced off, the impact ringing through the tank like a giant bell being struck. We were taking fire from multiple directions, outnumbered and outgunned, and it was only a matter of time before a German round found a weak spot and penetrated our armor. Thompson on the bow machine gun was firing constantly, trying to suppress German infantry that were using the tank attacks as cover to advance. His tracer rounds arced out into the darkness, and occasionally we'd hear screams indicating hits. Kowalski was loading as fast as he could, hands moving mechanically, sweat pouring down his face despite the cold. Martinez was useless, stuck in the driver's position with nothing to do since we couldn't move. But he stayed at his post, ready to attempt evasive maneuvers if we somehow got the tank mobile again. And Lieutenant Peterson was coordinating everything, calling out targets, making tactical decisions, keeping us focused and functional. We knocked out a second German tank, another Panzer IV at close range, maybe 200 yards. The kill was necessary but costly because the burning tank illuminated our position, made us a clear target for every German gun in the area. Immediately, we started taking concentrated fire, multiple tanks shooting at us, infantry rushing our position. A 75mm round hit our turret, a glancing blow that gouged a deep scar in the armor but didn't penetrate. Another hit our track, already damaged, and destroyed it completely, ensuring we'd never move under our own power again. "We're down to 8 rounds," Kowalski reported, his voice strained. "What do you want me to load?" Peterson didn't hesitate. "Load whatever will kill the most Germans. We're not leaving until this gun is empty or we're dead." I'd never heard him that determined, that resigned to our fate, and it was both inspiring and terrifying. We were going to fight until we couldn't fight anymore, and that probably meant we were going to die in this tank. The next hour was a blur of engagement and survival, firing at targets, taking hits, praying each time a German round struck that it wouldn't be the one that penetrated and turned the interior of Iron Maiden into an inferno. We were down to 4 rounds of main gun ammunition when I spotted the biggest threat we'd faced, a German Panther tank, identifiable by its distinctive profile and powerful 75mm KWK-42 gun, moving into position about 400 yards out. The Panther's frontal armor was too thick for our 75mm gun to penetrate at this range, but its side armor was vulnerable if I could get a shot. The problem was that the Panther's commander knew this, was angling the tank to present only frontal armor, was preparing to fire at us with a gun that could easily penetrate our armor at this range. "I need him to turn," I told Peterson. "I can't pin his front, but if he shows his side, I've got him." Peterson thought for maybe 2 seconds, then made a decision that probably saved our lives, but was completely insane. "Martinez, give me smoke from the engine. Make them think we're hit and on fire." Martinez understood immediately, revved the engine and did something to create a massive cloud of smoke from our exhaust, making it look like we'd been hit and were burning. The Panther's commander saw the smoke, assumed we were knocked out, and started to traverse his turret away from us to engage another target. That traverse exposed his side armor for maybe 3 seconds. I took the shot. The armor-piercing round covered 400 yards in less than a second, struck the Panther in the side just below the turret ring, penetrated and detonated the stored ammunition inside. The Panther exploded in a massive fireball, turret blown completely off the chassis, crew killed instantly. It was the most spectacular kill I'd ever achieved, and under different circumstances, I'd have been celebrating. But we'd just revealed that we were still functional, had maybe 30 seconds before every German gun reacquired us as a target. "Kowalski, load high explosive. We're going to suppress infantry, and then we're going to have to decide if we're staying or running." But before we could fire again, before we could make that decision, we heard it. The sound of American tank engines, multiple Shermans advancing from behind our position, moving up to reinforce the line. Lieutenant Peterson's platoon had broken free from their engagement and was coming to support us, bringing firepower and mobility that shifted the tactical balance. The Germans heard them too, started withdrawing, pulling back from the crossroads, rather than face a full platoon of American tanks. The attack broke, the Germans retreated, and we'd held. We'd done what Lieutenant Peterson had asked, had held that crossroads for 6 hours against overwhelming odds, had bought time for the line to stabilize. Peterson's tank pulled up beside Iron Maiden, and he dismounted and came over to check on us. We opened the hatches, let in the freezing air that somehow felt refreshing after 6 hours of breathing the foul atmosphere inside the tank, and Peterson climbed up to look at us. We were covered in sweat and grime, hands shaking from adrenaline, but alive and intact. Peterson looked at the damage to Iron Maiden, at the scars on the armor and the destroyed track, then looked at us. "You boys just saved the whole damn line. That crossroads was the key and you held it. I don't know how, but you held it. We spent that night with the platoon. Maintenance crews came up and started work on Iron Maiden's track. And we finally got out of the tank, stood on solid ground, tried to process what we'd survived. The 5 of us sat together, sharing coffee and cigarettes, not talking much, just being. We'd faced death together, had made the decision to stay when leaving was rational, had held an impossible position through sheer determination and skill. The bond between us, already strong, became something deeper, something that would last the rest of our lives. Iron Maiden was repaired over the following days, her track replaced, her battle damage patched, and she went back into service. We crewed her through the rest of the Battle of the Bulge, through the winter and spring campaigns, all the way into Germany until the surrender in May 1945. She took more hits, suffered more damage, but she always brought us through. That tank became more than just a vehicle, became a symbol of survival and determination, became a part of our crew in ways that are hard to explain to people who've never depended on a machine for their lives. After the war, the 5 of us stayed in touch, maintained the bond we'd forged in combat. We'd gather for reunions, share memories, support each other through the challenges of peacetime life. Lieutenant Peterson became a principal, led schools with the same calm decisiveness he'd shown in command. Martinez became a master mechanic, worked on cars with the same skill he'd shown driving tanks. Thompson raised a family in Alabama, had 7 kids, lived the optimistic life he'd always projected. Kowalski became a union organizer in Chicago, fought for workers' rights with the same determination he'd shown loading 75mm rounds. And I became a machinist, worked with metal and precision, found peace in creating things instead of destroying them. We're all gone now except me. Peterson died in 1998, Martinez in 2004, Thompson in 2011, Kowalski in 2016. I'm the last survivor of Iron Maiden's crew, the last one who remembers that night at the crossroads, the last witness to what we did and how we did it. When I'm gone, which will be soon, the story will be gone too unless I tell it, unless I preserve the memory of 5 men in a broken tank holding a critical position against overwhelming odds. The question I've pondered for 79 years is what made us stay. We could have abandoned Iron Maiden, could have saved ourselves, could have withdrawn to American lines with reasonable justification. The tank was disabled, we were outnumbered, the tactical situation was hopeless. Any rational analysis said we should leave. But we didn't leave, we stayed and fought, and I've spent decades trying to understand why. Part of it was duty, following orders, doing what we'd been trained to do. Part of it was trust in our commander, Lieutenant Peterson, whose judgment we respected even when it asked us to risk death. Part of it was pride, the refusal to abandon our tank and our position without exhausting every option. But mostly, I think, it was about each other. We were a crew, a team, a family forged in combat, and we couldn't abandon each other or the mission we'd been given. That bond, that mutual dependence and trust and affection, was stronger than fear or self-preservation. We stayed because leaving would mean betraying each other, and that was unthinkable. The night the Sherman tank held the line alone became a small footnote in the history of the Battle of the Bulge, a minor action that barely rates a mention in the history books. But for the men who were there, for the 5 of us in Iron Maiden and the infantry we supported and the line we anchored, it was anything but minor. It was the night we discovered what we were capable of, what we could endure, what we'd sacrifice for duty and for each other. It was the night a disabled tank and 5 exhausted men made the difference between a German breakthrough and an American defensive line that held. It was the night we earned the right to call ourselves tankers, to wear the insignia with pride, to know we'd done something that mattered. I'm 95 years old now, and Iron Maiden is long gone, probably scrapped for metal decades ago, recycled into cars or appliances or building materials. But she lives in my memory, perfect and eternal, scarred armor and all. I can still smell the interior, that distinctive mix of oil and gunpowder and sweat. I can still hear the sounds, the roar of the 75mm gun and the clatter of the machine guns and the ping of German rounds hitting our armor. I can still feel the cold, the bone-deep chill of that December night. And I can still see my crew, Peterson calling targets, Martinez at the controls, Thompson on the bow gun, Kowalski loading with mechanical efficiency. All of us working together as a single organism with one purpose: hold the line. If this story moved you, if it helped you understand what tank crews endured and the bonds they formed and the impossible things they accomplished, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to hear more stories from World War II veterans. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember the tankers, the men who fought in steel coffins, who trusted their machines and each other, who held impossible positions because someone had to. Remember Iron Maiden and her crew, 5 men who stayed when leaving made sense, who fought when the odds were impossible, who held a crossroads in Belgium for 6 hours and made the difference. Thank you for listening to this old tanker's memories of the night we discovered what we were made of.